The first light of dawn creeps across the horizon, but for a Roman soldier, the day has already begun. The air is cold, damp with the heavy breath of the night, and the hard ground beneath him offers no comfort. His cloak, thin, coarse, and smelling of sweat, served as his only blanket. When the centurion's voice rings out, sharp as iron on stone, there is no time to linger, no time to savor the comfort of rest. The soldier stirs, his body aching from the previous day's march, his stomach reminding him that hunger is a constant companion. Could you wake to such conditions and march another 30 kilometers under the blazing sun with 30 kilos of armor, weapons, and gear strapped to your body? For the Roman legionary, this was not extraordinary. It was routine. The discipline of Rome was forged not only in blood and steel, but in the daily grind of survival. And survival began, quite literally, with what entered the soldier's mouth. Food was not a luxury. It was not pleasure. It was the foundation of the empire's strength, the hidden fuel behind victories that shaped the world. To understand the Roman soldier's life, we must walk beside him for 24 hours, tracing every meal, every bite, every swallow of sour drink. What he ate, when he ate it, and how he prepared it reveals more than just nutrition. It reveals Rome itself. And so we step into his day. The sun is still climbing over the hills. The camp is stirring with the sound of men coughing, armor clanking, and fires crackling to life. The soldier knows that before he takes a single step on the march, he must face the first ritual of survival: breakfast. But don't imagine steaming bowls of porridge or platters of roasted meat. The reality was far more humble and far more brutal. Morning routine and the first meal breakfast in the Roman legion was not served to the soldier. It was his duty to make it himself. The army supplied grain, raw, unprocessed, handed out in rough sacks. Wheat was the lifeblood of Rome's legions, making up as much as 3/4 of their daily calories. It was practical, easy to transport, easy to store, and endlessly versatile. But there was no luxury in its preparation. Each squad of soldiers carried with them a small portable hand mill. At dawn, after shivering through the cold night, the men would kneel on the hard-packed earth, grinding the raw wheat into flour. The grinding was slow, tiring, and noisy, a chorus of stone against stone echoing across the camp. In those moments, the soldier's day had already begun to drain his strength. With flour in hand, choices had to be made. The simplest option was pulse, a thick porridge made by boiling flour with water. Heavy, bland, and almost joyless, it was swallowed more than eaten. Yet it delivered warmth to the body and enough energy to shoulder the day's burden. Others preferred to bake the flour into rough flatbreads, laying dough across hot stones or inside makeshift clay ovens known as panis militaris. These breads were dense and chewy, eaten quickly, sometimes with nothing more than a sip of watered vinegar to wash them down. In the smoke-filled camp, the scent of scorched grain mingled with sweat and ash. This was the Roman soldier's morning, grim, efficient, and unrelenting. But the true emblem of Roman practicality came in the form of bucellatum. This was not soft bread, nor steaming porridge, but a rock-hard biscuit baked until every drop of moisture was gone. Dense, unyielding, and nearly impossible to chew without soaking it first in water or wine, bucellatum was not designed for pleasure. It was designed to endure. Soldiers called it war bread, for it could last weeks, even months without spoiling. To eat it was to chew duty itself, harsh, joyless, but indispensable. This morning ritual reveals something profound. For the Roman legionary, food was not simply sustenance. It was discipline embodied. Every soldier began his day not with comfort, but with a reminder that survival demanded effort. His hunger could only be quieted by his own labor, his body sustained by food stripped of pleasure. And as the sun rose higher, the legion prepared to march. On the march, eating while moving, the order comes and the army begins to move. Dust rises, boots strike the earth in rhythm, and thousands of men fall into step, shields on their backs, weapons at their sides. The Roman legion was a machine, but even machines need fuel. On the march, there was no time for leisurely meals. Food had to be eaten quickly, practically, often while walking. Here, bucalatum came into its own. Soldiers carried these biscuits in their packs, dry and unyielding, ready to be softened in water, wine, or even the sour drink of vinegar water called posca. To bite into one without softening was to risk breaking a tooth, but soaked for a few moments, it became edible. Not enjoyable, never satisfying, but edible. Sometimes a soldier might find comfort in a handful of dried fruits, figs, raisins, or dates. These were not common, but when they appeared, they were a blessing. Light to carry, packed with sugar and calories, they provided a sudden rush of strength in the endless monotony of marching. Imagine a soldier reaching into his pouch after hours on the road, finding a few figs hidden away at the bottom. In that moment, the dried fruit was not just food, it was hope compressed into sweetness, a reminder that the world still held flavor. Legumes were another staple. Lentils, chickpeas, and beans could be pre-cooked the night before and carried cold in satchels. A soldier might chew them by the roadside, adding garlic or onion for strength. These simple foods did more than feed the body, they healed it. Garlic fought infection, onion aided digestion, and cabbage was believed to prevent poisoning. For the legionary, eating was as much medicine as nourishment, but marching was more than eating, it was enduring. Under the scorching sun, armor biting into shoulders, sweat soaking through tunics, every step demanded energy, and energy came from these humble foods. The soldier did not dream of feasts. He dreamed of a mouthful of bread, a sip of posca, a handful of beans. That was enough to push one more mile, one more hill, one more day. In Rome's legions, food was not always nourishment. Sometimes it was punishment. Imagine the soldier who falters in line, disobeys an order, or shows fear in the face of the enemy. His comrades march forward with pride, wheat rations on their backs, but his sack is different. Inside is not wheat, the sacred grain of the Roman soldier, but barley. Barley was not the food of men. It was the food of animals, coarse and heavy, harder to digest, bitter in taste. To a Roman, it carried humiliation. A soldier who received barley rations knew immediately what it meant. He had failed. The Romans even had a name for it, fermentum. It was a sentence spoken not with whips or chains, but with grain. Every chew of barley was a chew of shame. The soldier, grinding it into flour, felt the sting of disgrace. His fellow legionaries watched, some in silence, others with scorn, for all understood what it meant. In an army where reputation was survival, barley was worse than hunger. It was dishonor. This system reveals the genius and cruelty of Roman discipline. Food itself became a tool of control. To be fed wheat was to be recognized as a soldier of Rome. To be fed barley was to be reminded that you had failed Rome. Hunger may break the body, but shame breaks the spirit, and in Rome's legions, spirit was everything. Yet not all meals were harsh punishments or bland necessity. On rare occasions, the legionary might taste meat. For the ordinary soldier, meat was no routine luxury. It was fortune, privilege, and symbol. Most of the time, meat entered the diet through the hunt. Rome encouraged its soldiers to hunt while on campaign. It filled their bellies, yes, but it also kept their skills sharp. To stalk a deer through the forests of Germania, to ambush wild boars in the hills of Gaul, was both sustenance and training. Every arrow loosed at a bird in flight, every spear thrown at a fleeing hare, was practice for battle itself. When successful, the spoils became a feast. Fires lit in the evening, the smell of roasting flesh rising into the night air. These moments broke the monotony of porridge and beans. Soldiers laughed, told stories, and for a brief time remembered that food could also bring joy. But meat was not always the prize of the hunt. Often it was the prize of victory. When Rome crushed an enemy, it confiscated livestock. Herds of pigs, sheep, or cattle became part of the spoils of war. Pork, especially, became a favorite among the legions. Its fat preserved well, its flesh salted easily, and strips of dried pork could last for weeks. To eat pork was not only to eat, it was to taste triumph. Still, such meals were rare. The Roman soldier could not expect meat every day. More often, he would only smell it, dream of it, long for it while chewing his dried biscuit. But when it came, it carried weight beyond flavor. Meat was morale. It told the soldier, "Today Rome smiles upon you." Vegetables and health. The hidden weapons at first glance. The Roman diet may seem bare: grain, beans, bread, water. But hidden within were foods that carried power, not in taste but in medicine. Garlic was chief among them. To the Roman soldier, garlic was more than seasoning. It was protection. Ancient writers believed it strengthened the lungs, fought infection, and gave stamina. Soldiers chewed raw cloves before long marches, the sharp bite in their mouths a reminder of the strength it promised. To this day, garlic's antibacterial properties are real. Rome, without knowing the science, had stumbled upon a weapon against disease. Onion was another constant. Not sweet, not subtle, but hearty and energizing. Soldiers ate onions for endurance, digestion, and warmth. An onion could be thrown into a pot of beans, roasted on coals, or chewed raw by the roadside. It gave no luxury, but it gave vigor. And then there was cabbage, perhaps the most underestimated food of the Roman legion. The Romans believed cabbage could cure almost anything. They ate it boiled, raw, or steeped in vinegar. It was thought to heal wounds, fight poison, and protect against sickness. Whether superstition or truth, cabbage held a place of honor in camp. To some commanders, it was as valuable as a weapon. These vegetables, garlic, onion, cabbage, formed a kind of invisible shield around the soldier. They were small, humble, easily stored or foraged along the march. Yet they kept the men alive when cold, exhaustion, and disease threatened to do what enemy spears could not. This was Rome's genius, to use even the humblest foods as weapons of endurance. While enemy armies starved, sickened, or collapsed, Rome's soldiers chewed garlic, swallowed cabbage, and pressed on. Their diet was not glamorous, it was not indulgent, but it worked, and that was all that mattered. Evening camp meals. Fire, fellowship, and survival as the sun dipped and the long day of marching or drilling drew to an end. The Roman camp came alive with an entirely different kind of energy. Shields stacked neatly in rows, tents erected with military precision, and sentries posted. The legion settled into its nightly rhythm. At the heart of this routine was food, an evening meal that was never lavish, yet always vital. Small fires dotted the camp, glowing like stars across a darkened field. Around them, groups of 8 soldiers, called a contubernum, gathered. These men were more than comrades. They were tent mates, brothers forged by hardship. Each group cooked and ate together, pooling rations, sharing duties, dividing responsibility. Food was no longer just fuel, it was the glue that bound the smallest unit of the Roman army. The meal itself was modest but filling. Wheat porridge thickened into a gruel, lentils boiled with onions, chickpeas stewed in olive oil. These were the staples. When fortune allowed, bits of cheese were added, or a dash of vinegar for sharpness. Bread, when available, was torn and dipped, sometimes charred lightly over the coals for flavor. But what mattered most was not the menu, but the moment. Around the fire, soldiers laughed at the day's blunders, boasted of past battles, whispered of loved ones far away. They carved dice from bone, sang marching songs, or sharpened blades in silence. It was here, in these fragile hours, that a soldier remembered his humanity. The evening meal was also when officers could reward or punish. A little extra wine, a sign of approval, reduced rations, a mark of failure. Food remained, always, a tool of command. Yet for the ordinary legionary, each mouthful after a long day was both comfort and survival. He ate not for pleasure, but to endure. Tomorrow, the cycle would begin again. Chapter 8. Drinks of the Legion. Posca, wine, and water. When we imagine Roman soldiers, many picture them with goblets of rich wine. The truth, however, was far humbler. The legion's most common drink was posca, a simple mixture of sour wine vinegar diluted with water. To the modern tongue, it might sound unappealing. But to the Romans, posca was brilliant. It made stagnant water safe to drink, killing bacteria. It quenched thirst on hot marches, the acidity refreshing. It was cheap, portable, and practical. Soldiers flavored it with herbs when available, making it slightly more palatable. Posca was not a luxury. It was necessity, survival in liquid form. Wine did appear, but rarely in the way civilians enjoyed it. When issued, it was often watered down heavily. Only officers or wealthier soldiers could indulge in finer vintages, and even then, it was more a symbol of rank than a daily indulgence. For the rank and file, a cup of wine meant either a celebration, a reward, or the spoils of conquest. Water, of course, was essential, but risky. Streams and wells could carry sickness. Without vinegar or wine to cut it, water alone was dangerous. Roman camps often dug ditches and secured water sources, but soldiers knew well that unclean water could slay more men than the enemy. Drinks, therefore, were not about taste, but about health and discipline. Posca kept the legion moving, prevented outbreaks of disease, and reminded each man that even in thirst, Rome provided. To drink posca was to drink Roman ingenuity, a simple solution that kept an empire alive. Chapter 9. Logistics and the Invisible Army, Salt, Oil, and Organization. If food was the fuel of Rome's legions, then logistics was the engine. Behind every soldier chewing a crust of bread stood a vast, invisible machine, ensuring that bread existed at all. Rome mastered the art of supply. Armies on the march carried wheat on their backs, but caravans followed with more. Mule trains carried sacks of grain, barrels of oil, and amphorae of vinegar. Rivers and roads became lifelines, feeding men hundreds of miles from home. Rome's engineers were not only builders of aqueducts and amphitheaters, they were architects of survival. Salt was one of the most vital supplies, not just for flavor but for preservation. Salted pork and fish could last for months. The very word salary comes from salarium, a reference to salt rations given to soldiers. In many ways, a soldier was paid not only in coin but in the salt that kept him alive. Olive oil was another treasure. Soldiers cooked with it, rubbed it on their bodies to ward off cold, even used it for light in simple lamps. A jar of oil was more than food. It was comfort, medicine, and utility in one. The genius of Roman logistics was its adaptability. In fertile lands, soldiers lived off the countryside. In barren stretches, supply lines stretched like arteries from Rome itself. To feed an army of tens of thousands was no small feat, yet Rome did it again and again. Other empires collapsed from hunger. Rome endured. This invisible army of farmers, traders, pack animals, and laborers was as vital as any legionary with a sword. Without them, the might of Rome would have starved before it conquered. And so, behind every soldier's 24 hours of eating, lay the unseen weight of an empire's organization. Could you survive on a soldier's diet? Now that we've walked step by step through the meals of a Roman soldier's day, one question remains. Could you live as they did? Could you wake before dawn, break your fast on coarse porridge and hard bread, march 20 miles with only a chunk of butylatum in your pack, and end your day with nothing more than beans, onions, and vinegar to drink? It's tempting to imagine that Roman soldiers lived on abundance, conquering the world with bellies full of wine and roasted meat. But the truth is starkly different. The empire was built not on luxury, but on discipline and endurance. These men were trained not just with the sword, but with the stomach. They learned to thrive on simplicity. Hunger was a constant shadow, yet it never broke them. It hardened them. Their food was more than sustenance. It was a weapon. Porridge gave stamina. Vinegar kept them healthy. Salt preserved their strength across campaigns. The very plainness of their meals was part of Rome's genius. By stripping away luxury, Rome ensured every man was equal at the fire. Every soldier carried the same ration. Every legion marched with the same resilience. Yet there's a deeper lesson hidden in their diet. What a Roman soldier ate in 24 hours was not meant to delight, but to remind him he was part of something larger. Every grain of wheat was tied to Rome's farmers. Every jar of oil was shipped across provinces. Every sip of posca connected him to the empire's unseen machinery. Food was survival, yes, but it was also Rome itself, feeding its sons as they extended its borders. And so we return to the question, could you do it? Could you endure day after day on the rations of a legionary with no promise of comfort, only the certainty of duty? Most of us, softened by choice and variety, would struggle. But for the Roman soldier, it was not just a diet. It was destiny. In the end, what they ate in 24 hours tells us more than what filled their stomachs. It tells us what fueled their victories, what sustained their empire, and what shaped the very character of Rome. Bread, beans, vinegar, salt. These were the true foundations of conquest. So next time you sit down to a meal, consider this. An empire was built on food that today we might dismiss as poor man's fare. But for Rome's legions, it was enough. More than enough. It was the taste of victory.